Last Friday, Antifa and other far-left extremists did what they usually do in Portland. They went around rioting and, whatever. But they attacked a man of Asian descent that they claimed to be Andy No. The only issue is that they don't know for a fact it was Andy. The people there weren't entirely sure, but a lot of people still were screaming, "It's Andy." News outlets have not confirmed the man was Andy, and maybe it was Andy No. Now, if you're not familiar with who Andy No is, he is a journalist who has covered Antifa extensively, written a book about them, and he's had first-hand experience in Portland covering these protests. But I believe it was a couple of years ago, or maybe last year, he was brutally attacked. They threw milkshakes at him. They beat him. They left him with his ears bleeding, his mouth bleeding, black eyes. They beat him pretty severely because he reports on them, and they don't like that. I've seen a lot of this stuff, in my years covering the far left extremists, notably in Chicago during no NATO protests. The far left linked arms and then yelled, "Charge the press," or something like that, and then started attacking journalists. They were in organizing meetings. They say, "Don't smash a journalist's camera. It could pay your rent," a reference to stealing their equipment and selling it. They don't like journalists. They don't like people who report on them. And because Andy No extensively reports on them, they will beat anyone who so much as resembles Andy No. And that often means to these, extremely racist white progressives, any Asian millennial man, apparently. So this reminds me of V for Vendetta, that moment at the end of the movie where they're like, eventually someone does something stupid. These people may have just attacked a random guy for the crime of being an Asian man in the Pacific Northwest. That's it. That's it. There are a lot of Asian people in the Pacific Northwest, and not all of them are Andy No. And it's not the first time they've done this. There was another incident Andy No tweeted about. An Antifa in Portland tracked down and accost a random Asian male who they accuse of being Andy No. And this guy's like, "I'm sick of it. You people keep harassing me, accusing me of being Andy No." Why? Because he's got a haircut, I guess. Or because he's an Asian male that they see at a protest and they accuse of being Andy No. So did Andy No actually show up? I don't know for sure. But this is the point where I think we see people doing things that are incredibly stupid, because maybe it was Andy. But there's a few problems. I'll read the story, but I want to say there's a few problems with this first. Why would Andy show up to an Antifa protest wearing nothing but a standard COVID mask? The dude was brutally beaten before and has avoided being on the ground for these events, for the most part, since. Wouldn't he wear a hoodie and a bigger mask? Just his eyes? Maybe even something covering his eyes. Why would he go down there and just wear a mask? More importantly, most people have tweeted, Andy No left the country a long time ago, and COVID lockdown for international travel is still in effect. So did Andy No leave to a different country and then fly back, and go through the quarantine and all that stuff? Maybe he did. Maybe. But it just seems, if I have to make the least amount of assumptions, considering Antifa has attacked random Asian males in the past, considering the fact that Andy was reportedly out of the country, and considering the fact that Andy has no good reason to go on the ground, unless to do a publicity stunt like this, I suppose, there's too many assumptions in saying Antifa attacked Andy No. Here's the story from the Portland Tribune. But I want to point something out first. And I got a sponsor spot, which I'm extremely grateful for. In the description below, you'll see a link to ground.news. Go to ground.news/Tim Pool. You'll notice at the top of the Portland Tribune, there is a Ground News bar. And it shows something very important. Portland Tribune, covering the Andy No story, is the only left-leaning source to cover this. Out of 9 sources, 83% are right-wing. You know what that means? It means the left will not hear this story. And therein lies the big problem. If Antifa is going around and beating random people just because they're Asian, it's extremely important the left knows about this. So you can do a few things. For one, ground.news, what they do is they take the bias ratings of many news outlets, which is imperfect, but, everybody's working on it. And they show you on these stories where the reporting is and whether or not you have a blind spot. So as we can see here, if you're on the left, you're not learning about this stuff. The right hears about it all the time. So again, go to ground.news/Tim Pool, and it'll link you to the app to download Ground News. It's a really great service. I'm incredibly impressed with it, because now I can have on all of the articles I pull up for you, I can show you the bias breakdown. And sometimes stories are heavily covered by the left and not the right. So I guess the main issue with that, as I brought up before, is the right still does read left-wing news sources. The left does not read right-wing news sources. So again, go to ground.news/Tim Pool, download the app. I'm extremely grateful that they're sponsoring this show. I don't normally do sponsor spots on this channel or my other channel, but I got to be honest. I'm actually going to use their extension so you can all see the bias breakdown in my opining and reporting. I think it's extremely important, but more importantly too, it shows you exactly why you have to share these videos, the ones that I make, because people on the left don't know this, and they're not gonna know this because they just watched CNN, who didn't report this, or at least presumably didn't report it. They're not listed as any of the sources according to ground.news, and I really doubt they did. The last time Andy No got attacked, Brian Stelter gave him like 10 seconds. I just want to say it's wrong to attack a journalist. I'm covering it. Anyway, moving on. He doesn't go into detail. He doesn't talk about the violent extremism. The media doesn't talk about it. So most people who aren't paying attention to politics aren't going to see it. So ground.news/Tim Pool, download the app and share this video. Portland Tribune reports left-wing protesters chased down, attacked, and unmasked a man they believe to be right-wing author Andy No in disguise. They didn't unmask him. He's wearing a mask. The Portland Tribune has not independently confirmed the fleeing man's identity, and No did not immediately issue any public statements on the matter. One longtime protest observer told the Tribune he saw No working out at a gym in a southeast Portland neighborhood 1 week ago, a gym staff reportedly greeting No by name. The Friday evening protest, which had lasted for several uneventful hours, at least by Portland standards, had not been declared an unlawful assembly or riot by authorities as the clock neared 11:30 p.m. With a crowd of perhaps 100 marching through the city without any reports of property damage. I love how they have to. There was no property damage this time. They say at that point, many in the group became suspicious of a fellow protester who was wearing tinted, oversized ski goggles. Okay, so there you go. Maybe Andy really did go down and was in disguise. A mask that obscured his face, black clothing, and a Black Lives Matter flag worn as a cloak. Protesters said the man was attending the demonstration alone and did not respond to questions. Suddenly, a foot chase broke out, with around a dozen people chasing the person they believed to be No away from the Justice Center. The man attempted to seek refuge in several buildings, but was eventually tackled to the ground and struck repeatedly. His goggles and cape were torn from him. Here are the images. This person, Zane Sparling, says black-clad protesters chased away a man they say is Andy No during a protest in downtown Portland tonight. They didn't remove his mask, though. And the problem is, in this other, it actually looks like this guy. Antifa in Portland tracked down and accosted a random Asian male who they accuse of being Andy No. It's not the first time it happened. Andy called these people idiots. So I have a few questions I want to ask. If it was Andy No, why wouldn't he just answer the questions? If they're like, hey, who are you? I'm Bill. Hey, man, don't ask my name. Why wouldn't he just say something? If it was somebody who didn't know what to do, if it was a regular random Asian guy who was being questioned and assaulted, he might panic and not respond to questions. More importantly, what's the point of wearing a mask and goggles and then have people ask you your name? Why go join the black bloc if that's going to happen? So I wonder, I do think it's a tough call. This may very well be Andy. Andy may have shown up for some dumb reason and gone into the protest. I don't know why. But there is another Asian dude who has been at these protests who's been accused of being Andy before. Maybe that was him. Maybe there's a deeper conspiracy afoot. Maybe Andy knew that if a regular Asian guy showed up, they'd beat him. And then he could sit back as the news reported it was him. And then he could come out and say, that wasn't me. I'm not even in the country. It's hard to know where the probability, which is probable. I kind of lean towards maybe it's just Andy No, but it's a weird thought that Andy would just go down there and do this. For real, like there's literally no reason. He just sold the book. Dude's got money. Dude has no reason to put himself in harm's way. And I'm speaking from experience. I used to go on the ground and cover things all the time. They started threatening and harassing me, posting pictures of my mom. And so I said, I'm not going to go down anymore. There's literally no upside to me or Andy being on the ground. Okay, I guess Andy wanted a publicity stunt. I don't know. I really don't. Maybe it was him. Maybe it wasn't. At the very least, Antifa shouldn't be attacking people if they don't know for sure. And that's what happened last time. They say the man then fled up Morrison Street and received shelter inside the swanky The Nines Hotel. He was seen crouching behind the front desk as confused clerks attempted to secure the premises. Protesters chanted and pounded on the glass. "I want Andy No," one cried. "He's hiding right here. Come on out." The man eventually entered an elevator and was not seen again. Portland Police Bureau officers, who had already made at least one targeted arrest earlier in the night, soon arrived by van and arrested another person outside the hotel. The arrested person's phone continued to stream video from inside the evidence bag. Officers eventually withdrew from the scene, leaving a small crowd to tangle with hotel valets and befuddled guests. They're going to say No is one of the most prominent critics of the left-wing movement known as Antifa. As recently as 2019, he was a little-known writer who frequently live-streamed Portland demonstrations. During an infamous rally in June of that year, crowds doused him with milkshakes and attacked him. The incident gave No a massive social media following he parlayed into frequent television appearances and a book published earlier this year. Yeah, so maybe that was it. Maybe Andy was like, I'm going to go on TV and get some press, and I'm just going to show up and then get attacked. Maybe. It just seems really dumb. But maybe. I don't know. There have been several incidents in which Asian men attending protests have been confused with Andy No. Well, No recently made headlines after announcing he had relocated to London. You see, he has also occasionally attended protests incognito, writing in December that he sometimes goes in black bloc to protests, but not always. Black bloc refers to the midnight colors worn by members of the left-wing group. All right, let's play a game. If it were me, I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but I'm not stupid by any stretch of the imagination. So, well, the left would disagree, but no, you know what I would do? I would tweet, I go to these protests. I would stay away from them and then sit back and wait for them to panic and attack a random person. And then once they do, publicity. If Andy No wanted to do a publicity stunt, why would he go down there and actually put himself in harm's way? He would have to expect to be revealed and beaten if that were the case. What if Andy No just says he goes to these protests because he knows eventually they'll beat someone and then he'll get publicity anyway? Long story short, if the dude wanted to do a PR stunt, he need only sit back and wait. Since the incident, Andy No has not tweeted. Kind of odd. So we'll see. It may very well be him. They say a spokesman for the Portland Police Bureau said officers arrived outside the hotel, learning that someone was being chased and assaulted. Officers did stand by to allow an injured person to get in an ambulance. Said Police Sergeant Kevin Allen, "I cannot release the name of the person involved." That's another reason why I'm not convinced it's No. It's tough, right? It's a coin toss. But if it was Andy, I'd imagine they'd be like, Andy No was brought into a hotel. Like, I don't know. If it was a random person, they wouldn't release the name of a non-public figure. No and the Nines did not immediately respond to requests for comment. So as I've shown you, we see this. Let me show you this comparison we have. Andy, when he got beat last time, he's a little on the thicker side of, a little chubby going on. And I don't think this guy is Andy. I could be wrong. You look at this photo of him. It doesn't look like Andy. No, Andy's hair. I don't know. I just don't know. What I do know is things are getting crazy. So I look at Andy's nose. It's got a little curve. I look at this guy's nose. He's wearing a mask. It doesn't look to me like it's Andy. It looks like they just beat a random person. You're in a black bloc. You're protesting. You don't want anyone to know who you are. People start screaming at you and chasing you. What can you do? Stop and just stand there and say you're not him? These guys know what happens. They're going to beat you anyway. So we've either got, we got one of two things. We got a guy who joined Black Bloc and reaps what he has sown because they beat him and chased him, or Andy No got caught. Or some other Asian dude is trying to be like Andy. I don't know. I'll tell you this. The escalation is very real and very scary. The beatings, the street violence, but more than that. Check out this story from the Daily Mail. Calls for Michael Flynn to face court-martial after retired general tells QAnon conference a Myanmar-style coup should happen in the U.S. It's a little bit over the top, this story, because he did say it, but someone asked a question. They said, why what happened in Myanmar can't happen here? There's no reason, Flynn responded. I mean, it should happen. That's right. Except what happened there is actually kind of scary. They say Myanmar's military-led coup saw the country's democratically elected government overturned. Military Chief Min Aung Hlaing was installed as the country's leader with a junta killing hundreds of civilians. No, it should not happen here. But people on the right are adamant and convinced. It doesn't matter what you believe. You know, people say, this is the message I try to convey all the time. When people are like, Tim, my side is the right side. I'm like, that doesn't matter. Literally does not. I have people being like, don't you know what's happening in Arizona? Haven't you been watching the news? And I'm like, dude, why? No, serious question. Why? Is it going to change your mind if the audit comes back and says Trump lost? No. Is it going to change their mind if the audit comes back in the inverse, saying that there was something wrong that happened? No. No one is going to change their mind. The audit won't do anything. Now, what it may do is embolden the existing factions. If the audits come back and say something shocking and dramatic, then those who already believe it may view that as a call to arms, a call to action. And of course, the establishment, they're going to keep screaming January 6th and calling for a commission because they need to keep the pressure on. This is Cold War. And that's what's scary. We already saw hot escalation. So maybe we've entered a hot civil war. I mean, the moment that they stormed the Capitol or the moment Black Lives Matter went around smashing buildings, you decide. You know, historians may go back as far as Occupy Wall Street. I don't know. So maybe we are already in the hot war. You know, people have said it's a cold civil war. It's a culture war. But we've already seen a faction storm the Capitol building. I mean, that constitutes something, right? The Revolutionary period, for instance, took, I think, over 20 years, and it included a lot of stories, the Boston Tea Party, the Boston Massacre, etc. And these happened, like, not those moments specifically, but many of these historical moments years apart. So perhaps, depending on who wins this conflict, history will be written by the victors. So you look at what Michael Flynn is saying. And what is he saying? We need armed escalation. Does he really mean it? Maybe not. But he said it. They got asked the question. He said it should happen. And that to me is worrying. It doesn't matter who is right or wrong. It matters that people are ready and willing to fight. And that I think it really comes down to this. I think the woke faction is half the size as the anti-woke faction. However, the anti-woke faction plays by the rules. So whether it's a Republican or not, because I don't like the Republican Party, I don't think they always play by the rules, but the anti-woke faction is not necessarily just the Republican Party. There was a poll done by YouGov. Asked people in the UK if they were woke. 12% said yes, 23% said no, and 59 or whatever number, I don't remember the exact numbers, said, I don't know what woke means. Think about that right now in the context of the US. It's probably true here as well. There's probably similar numbers, which means so long as the woke control the cultural institutions, the anti-woke will not break the rules. The woke cult will. Anti-woke won't. So they can fly their flags at our embassies as a sign of dominance. I mean, flying a Marxist flag at a U.S. embassy, and it is. The Black Lives Matter organizers literally say they're Marxist. That Patrice woman literally says she was a Marxist. They use the red salute as their symbol. They're flying their flags at our embassies. At a certain point, you have to recognize how bad and serious things are getting. It's not just about Andy Ngo getting attacked. It's about the escalation. It's about the fact that the country is split, and it doesn't matter what regular people think because regular people often aren't involved. Look at the numbers when it came to the revolution. It was something like 20% opposed the revolution, 30-something% were in favor, and the rest said, we don't know or care, leave us alone. And the revolution happened. Something like that. It might have been like 38%, like it was a high percentage. So what percentage of anti-woke do you need before there is substantial revolt from the anti-woke in this country? We have these audits. We have Donald Trump's claims. But is it enough for regular people? Most people who are anti-woke, most conservatives, are not going to do anything. Only a few hundred people showed up in D.C. on the 6th at the Capitol. I mean, there were hundreds of thousands watching Trump speak, but not engaging in any serious violence or anything like that. Imagine if they wanted to. Yeah, that's where things get more worrying. The left is keeping up its pressure campaign. The establishment and the media, The Republican establishment is joining the Democrats to make sure the framing is absolutely anti-Trump and anti-establishment. It's not pro-establishment. They're trying to make sure the narrative goes against anyone who is anti-establishment. That includes Republicans. So that's why you'll get Republicans constantly using the framing of the left. They'll use Antifa's language. They'll use Democrats' language. They won't use their own language. Republicans need to go into the House and to the Senate and start talking about Antifa insurrection, saying this country faced a year of insurrection from the far left and we demand an investigation. These people are insane claiming Antifa doesn't exist, but they don't do it. They use the language of the left. They argue with the left. They let the left take the center. So long as they have the center of the board, they're in a strong position to win. Do what you do. Does any of it really matter? In the end, is the big question. I think it all just adds grains of sand to the heap that suggest we're headed towards some serious conflict. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 1 p.m. on this channel. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you all then.